What happens when a man who has conquered the world is brought to his knees in the middle of a 5-star restaurant? Not by a rival, not by a market crash, but by a single sentence from a waitress he tried to crush. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of Corwin Maddox, a titan of industry whose fortune was built on forgetting his past. But the past has a funny way of finding you. Tonight at a dinner, meant to seal the biggest deal of his life, a spilled glass of wine will unleash a torrent of secrets, shame, and a forgotten promise that will change everything. Stay with us, because the most powerful man in the room is about to become the smallest. The restaurant was called Aethelgard's, a name as old and heavy as the money that flowed through its doors. Patrons didn't just dine here. They performed. Deals were signed on linen napkins, alliances were forged over seared scallops, and reputations were silently executed with the raise of an eyebrow. Tonight, the air was particularly thick with consequence. Seated at the emperor's table in the center of the room was Corwin Maddox, a man who didn't just occupy a space. He colonized it. Corwin was a monolith of modern capitalism. His face etched with the faint lines of sleepless nights and ruthless decisions was a regular feature in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Maddox Capital was more than a company. It was a predator swallowing smaller firms with an appetite that was both feared and admired. Tonight's dinner was the final courtship in the hostile takeover of a legacy tech firm, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would be his crowning achievement. Across from him sat Richard Holloway, younger, sleeker, a shark who swam comfortably in Corwin's wake. To his right was Bernard Shaw, the older, more cautious legal counsel, whose job was less about aggression and more about cleaning up the collateral damage. The board is skittish. Corwin. Bernard, said his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the clinking of cutlery around them. They see this as an over-leveraged gamble. Corwin waved a dismissive hand, the massive gold signet ring on his pinky catching the light. Boards are paid to be skittish, Bernard. Not, it's how they justify their existence. They see risk. I see a dynasty. Holloway. What's the latest on their CTO? He's ready to jump, Richard said with a smug grin. We leak the news of his departure an hour before the market opens, trigger a sell-off, and we acquire them for pennies on the dollar. It's brutal. It's perfect. Corwin nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his cold grey eyes. This was his element. The strategy, the pressure, the clean, elegant violence of the boardroom. He felt a familiar surge of power, a feeling he chased more than profit. It was the only thing that quieted the persistent low-grade hum of dissatisfaction that followed him through his silent, cavernous penthouse and his lonely life. It was in this moment of triumph that Katherine Riley approached their table. Kate, as she preferred to be called, moved with an efficiency that bordered on invisibility, a skill honed by years of working thankless jobs to stay afloat. To the patrons of Aethelgard's, she was just part of the scenery, a uniformed ghost who refilled water glasses and cleared away plates. But beneath the starched apron, Kate was anything but invisible. She was a keen observer, a student of human nature. She saw the desperation behind a diner's loud laughter, the anxiety in a businessman's tapping fingers. She was also exhausted. Her day had started at 5 a.m., studying for the online macroeconomics course. She was taking the last remnant of a prestigious university scholarship she'd had to abandon when her mother fell ill. The illness had taken her mother, and the medical bills had taken everything else. Now at 26, she was trapped in a cycle of rent bills and soul-crushing fatigue. her dreams of a life in finance reduced to serving men who treated the world as their personal chessboard. As she approached the Maddox table, another waiter, a nervous new hire named Leo, hurried past her from the other direction, his tray laden with cocktails. He swerved to avoid a busboy, stumbled, and collided squarely with Kate. The world slowed to a crawl. The glass of 1982, Chateau Margaux, a 1 ton 200 Talda bottle Corwin had ordered, with an air of profound boredom tilted on Kate's tray. The dark red liquid arced through the air in a perfect, horrifying parabola, landing directly on the crisp white sleeve of Corwin Maddox's custom-tailored shirt. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Leo froze his face, a mask of pure terror. Bernard winced. Richard Holloway looked as if Kate had just committed a capital crime. For a moment, Corwin didn't react. He simply stared at the spreading crimson stain on his cuff, a blemish on his otherwise perfect world. The silence stretched, becoming thin and sharp. Then his head lifted slowly, and his gaze, glacial and furious, locked onto Kate. "Are you an imbecile?" His voice wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was a low, controlled hiss, dripping with a venom that made the entire restaurant flinch. Kate stood her ground, her tray still held steady. "Sir, I apologize. My colleague bumped into me." "I don't care." Corwin snapped his voice, rising now, drawing every eye in the room. "I am in the middle of a meeting that is worth more than your entire life, and you have the audacity to be this clumsy, this incompetent." Leo, shaking, started to stammer. It was my fault, sir. Get out of my sight." Corwin snarled at him, not even bothering to look. Leo practically vanished. Corwin's focus returned to Kate, his eyes narrowing into slits. He was making an example of her. This was a power play, a demonstration for his guests and the entire room. "Do you have any idea who I am?" He continued, the cliché-sounding, terrifyingly real coming from him. "A shirt like this costs more than you make in a month. This wine costs more than your rent. But it's not about the money. It's about the sheer lack of respect, the carelessness. People like you drift through life with no ambition, no purpose, and you get in the way of people who actually matter." He was on a roll now, the stress of his deal, the emptiness of his life, all of it coalescing into a focused beam of cruelty aimed at this anonymous waitress. "What is your name?" he demanded. The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, was now scurrying over his face, pale and sweating. "Mr. Maddox, sir. My deepest apologies. On behalf of the entire establishment, I'm talking to her." Corwin cut him off, his gaze still fixed on Kate. "What is your name?" Kate's face was impassive, but inside her a storm was raging. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the irony, the cosmic, crushing irony of it all. For years, she had wondered about this man. She had seen his picture in magazines her mother kept, had read articles about his triumphs, and had quietly wrestled with a deep, unnamed feeling of connection and abandonment. She had fantasized about meeting him, about asking the questions that haunted her. She never in a million years imagined it would be like this. He saw her as nothing, a nuisance, a person like you. The fury and the pain of a lifetime solidified into a single, crystalline point of clarity. The fear was gone. The exhaustion was gone. All that remained was a strange, chilling calm. She met his furious glare without blinking. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the restaurant like a surgeon's scalpel. It was quiet, steady, and laden with the weight of 2 decades of unspoken history. She said one sentence. "You don't remember me at all, do you, Corwin?" The room didn't just freeze. The universe tilted on its axis. The use of his first name, so casual, so intimate, so utterly out of place, was a sonic boom in the hushed reverence of the restaurant. It was a declaration that she was not just a waitress. She was someone. Richard Holloway's jaw went slack. Bernard Shaw's eyes widened, his legal mind racing through impossible scenarios. Mr. Henderson stopped dead in his tracks, but their reactions were nothing compared to Corwin's. The rage on his face didn't just vanish, it shattered, replaced by a profound and sudden confusion. The name Corwin, spoken by this woman in that specific tone, it bypassed his conscious mind and struck a deep, discordant chord somewhere in his memory, a place he had walled off and paved over decades ago. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Her eyes, they were a shade of defiant green he hadn't seen in years. The stubborn set of her jaw. There was something there, a ghost of a memory, a phantom limb of his past he couldn't quite place. Who was she? The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. In that moment, he was no longer the billionaire titan. He was just Corwin, and she, the nameless waitress, held all the cards. The silence that followed Kate's question was a living thing. It was heavier than any of Corwin Maddox's billions, more oppressive than any boardroom stare-down. Every diner in Aethelgard's was pretending not to watch, which meant every single one of them was listening with the intensity of a spy. Corwin felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a penniless nobody. Fighting for scraps, he was off balance. The world which he meticulously arranged and controlled every single day had suddenly wobbled. "What did you just call me?" he asked, his voice losing its sharp, metallic edge, now laced with a bewildered softness. Kate didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. The question hung in the air between them, shimmering with unspoken meaning. She simply held his gaze, her green eyes unreadable. She wasn't smirking. She wasn't triumphant. She looked weary, as if this confrontation was an inevitability she had long dreaded. Richard Holloway, ever the opportunist, saw the deal slipping away. He tried to reclaim control. "All right, that's enough," he said with a forced, condescending laugh, waving a hand at Kate. "Listen, sweetheart, whatever little game you're playing, it's over. Mr. Maddox is a very public figure. People try this kind of thing all the time. Just apologize for the mess and go." But Kate didn't even glance at him. Her focus was entirely on Corwin. The manager, Mr. Henderson, finally found his voice. "Miss Riley, that is completely inappropriate. You are fired. Please leave the premises immediately." Kate finally broke her gaze from Corwin's and turned to the manager. She untied her apron with low, deliberate movements, folding it neatly and placing it on the corner of a nearby service station. "My shift was over in 10 minutes anyway, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She then looked back at the table, her eyes sweeping over Bernard and Richard, before landing once more on Corwin. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of finality, and turned and walked away. She didn't storm out. She didn't flee. She walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had said everything that needed to be said. The exit doors swung shut behind her, leaving a vortex of confusion in her wake. "Well," Richard scoffed, trying to fill the void. "The nerve of some people. Good riddance." He turned back to Corwin, expecting him to snap back into his formidable self. "Corwin!" As we were saying, the CTO. But Corwin wasn't listening. He was staring at the doors Kate had disappeared through. The ghost of a memory was clawing at the edges of his mind. Her eyes. Where had he seen those eyes? They were stirring something deep within him. A memory connected to a time before Maddox Capital, before the penthouse, before the man in the mirror became a stranger. It was a feeling associated with cheap coffee, worn-out textbooks, and a crippling fear of failure mixed with a dizzying hope for the future. "Corwin," Bernard prompted gently. Corwin blinked, shaking his head, as if trying to clear water from his ears. "The deal," he said, the words sounding hollow. "Yes, the deal." But the fire was gone. The predatory instinct had vanished, replaced by a gnawing unease. He looked at the crimson stain on his cuff, but he no longer saw ruined silk. He saw a warning. "I've lost my appetite," he announced abruptly, pushing his chair back. "Richard finalized the press release. Bernard have the documents ready for my signature in the morning. I expect no complications." He stood, threw a black platinum credit card on the table without looking at the bill, and walked out, leaving his two top men exchanging worried glances. The performance was over. The Emperor had left the building, but he seemed smaller somehow. Outside, the cool night air did little to clear Corwin's head. His driver, a stoic man named Paul, held the door to the Rolls-Royce Phantom open. "Home, Mr. Maddox." "No," Corwin said, his voice tight. "Circle the block. I need to think." As the car glided silently through the city's glittering canyons of wealth and power, Corwin's mind was a maelstrom. He was a man who dealt in facts, in data, in quantifiable assets. This was something else, a variable he hadn't accounted for. Katherine Riley. The name meant nothing to him. But her face. He prided himself on his memory. He could recall obscure clauses in contracts from a decade ago, the stock fluctuations of a competitor from 5 years past. How could he not place her? The familiarity was too strong to be a coincidence, too specific to be a trick. The way she said his name, Corwin, it wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, as if they shared a history he had carelessly misplaced. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for Richard. No. Holloway was a tool for business, not for this. He scrolled further, landing on a name he hadn't contacted in months. Peterson. Mark Peterson was Corwin's fixer. A former intelligence agent, Peterson was the man who handled the things that couldn't be solved with money or lawyers. He was discreet, ruthlessly efficient, and loyal only to Corwin's retainer. Corwin pressed the call button. Peterson picked up on the first ring. "Sir?" "I have a name," Corwin said, skipping any pleasantries. "Katherine Riley. She works or worked at Aethelgard's on the Upper East Side. I want to know everything about her. Everything. Where she was born, who her parents are, where she went to school, what she ate for breakfast this morning. I want to know why she looked at me like she knew me. I want it on my desk by sunrise." "Understood, sir," Peterson replied, his voice a calm, professional hum. There was no surprise, no judgment. It was just another task. "And Mark," Corwin added a note of something almost like desperation creeping into his voice. "Be thorough. I have a feeling this is important." "It always is, sir," Peterson said, and the line went dead. Corwin leaned his head back against the cool leather. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. For the first time in over 20 years, The intricate fortress he had built around himself felt fragile. A single sentence from a waitress had found a crack, and he could feel the cold wind of the past beginning to blow through. The acquisition, the dynasty, the billions. It all felt distant and strangely insignificant. All that mattered now was the answer to a single, terrifying question. Who is Katherine Riley? Mark Peterson moved through the digital and physical world like a phantom. Before the sun's first rays touched the frost-covered windows of Corwin Maddox's penthouse, a slim encrypted tablet lay waiting on his mahogany desk. Peterson didn't just find information, he curated narratives. Corwin had been up all night. Sleep was an impossible luxury. He had paced the vast, empty expanse of his home, the silence amplifying the echo of Kate's voice in his mind. "You don't remember me at all, do you, Corwin?" He picked up the tablet. The screen glowed to life, displaying a single password-protected file, K. Riley Assessment. He entered his credentials, and the story of Katherine Riley's life began to unfold. Subject: Catherine Ann. Riley D.O.B. October 12th, 1999. P.O.B. New Haven, Connecticut. Current address: Apt 4B, 1812. Edgewater Ave. Queens. Current employment: Waitress Aethelgard's terminated as of last night. Part-time barista, The Daily Grind. Financials, negative net worth. Significant medical debt inherited from deceased mother. Multiple payday loans. No assets. Education: North Haven High School valedictorian. Yale University. Full academic scholarship. 2017. Major economics. Withdrew in good standing. Spring semester 2019. Reason cited family emergency. Corwin paused. Yale, his alma mater. She was brilliant. Valedictorian, a full ride to one of the most competitive universities on the planet, and she'd thrown it all away to become a waitress. It didn't make sense. The file continued, and the pieces began to lock into place. Family. Father. Unknown. Birth certificate. Lists. No father. Mother. Eleanor Munro. Deceased. The name hit Corwin like a physical blow. He stumbled back, gripping the edge of his desk to steady himself. Eleanor Munro. It wasn't a name he had forgotten. It was a name he had deliberately, painfully buried. The tablet screen faded from his vision, replaced by the flickering sepia-toned movie of his own memory. He wasn't Corwin Maddox, the Titan. He was Artie, a scholarship kid at Yale, hungry and terrified, with a fire in his belly and holes in his shoes. And Eleanor. Eleanor was the girl with the green eyes and a laugh that could make the New Haven winter feel like spring. She wasn't a society girl. She worked in the university library, shelving books to pay her own way. She had a fierce intelligence and a gentle heart. They met over a disputed passage in a John Donne poem and fell into a love that was as intense as it was improbable. She was the one who believed in him when no one else did, the one who edited his papers, who brought him coffee when he studied all night, who told him he wasn't just smart, he was destined for greatness. Their world was a tiny bubble of shared dreams and cheap pizza. He told her his ambition to build an empire, to escape the crushing poverty of his childhood, to never feel powerless again. She never doubted him. She just held his hand and said, "I'll be right here when you do." The memory sharpened, focusing on one specific night. A cold January evening. He'd just received the offer, a fully funded postgraduate fellowship with a legendary cutthroat investor in London. It was the launch pad he'd dreamed of, the 1 in a billion shot. But it meant leaving immediately. It meant leaving her. He remembered her face in the dim light of her small apartment, a mixture of pride and heartbreak. "You have to go, Artie," she'd said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "This is your star. You have to chase it." "I'll come back for you," he'd promised, his own voice cracking. "I swear it, Ellie. As soon as I'm established, I'll send for you. We'll build that empire together." He left the next week. The first few months were a blur of 100-hour work weeks and brutal competition. He wrote to her long, rambling letters full of his promises. Her replies were his lifeline. But as the months turned into a year, his world changed. The hunger for success became an addiction. The letters became shorter, then less frequent. Her replies started to sound more distant, tinged with a sadness he chose to ignore. He told himself it was for the best. She wouldn't fit into his new world of corporate raiders and extravagant parties. She was a gentle soul, and his world was becoming anything but. He convinced himself he was protecting her by letting her go. It was the first great lie he built his empire upon. He cashed in their shared dream for a stock portfolio. He never wrote again. He never went back. A notification sound from the tablet snapped him back to the present. Peterson had uploaded a new file. It was a scanned document. Corwin's hands trembled as he zoomed in. It was Eleanor Munro's death certificate. Date of death, March 2nd, 2021. Cause complications from multiple sclerosis. The diagnosis had come in early 2019, the same time Katherine Riley had dropped out of Yale. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. Eleanor had been sick. She had been dying, and he had been on the other side of the world, closing a deal in Tokyo, celebrating another victory. He hadn't even known. He scrolled down further in Peterson's file, his heart pounding a sickening rhythm against his ribs. Peterson had attached another document, a final devastating piece of the puzzle. It was Katherine Ann Riley's birth certificate. Date of birth, October 12th, 1999. Corwin's mind, the same mind that could calculate complex market algorithms in seconds, frantically did the math. He had left for London in January of 1999. January to October is 9 months. His gaze fell to the box on the form that had haunted him from the first page of the report. Father unknown. But it wasn't unknown. Not anymore. He was looking at the proof of his greatest, most unforgivable betrayal. Katherine Riley wasn't just the daughter of the woman he had abandoned. Those defiant green eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the fierce intelligence Peterson's report detailed. They weren't just echoes of her mother. They were echoes of him. Katherine Riley was his daughter. The waitress he had publicly humiliated, the human being he had dismissed as worthless. The woman he had accused of having no purpose was his own flesh and blood. The daughter he never knew he had. Corwin Maddox let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The tablet slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. The carefully constructed world of the billionaire titan, the man who had everything and felt nothing, came crashing down around him, leaving him buried in the rubble of a 26-year-old lie. He sank into his chair, a stranger in his own life, haunted by the ghost of a woman he once loved, and the living embodiment of the promise he had broken. The journey to Queens was the longest, most agonizing journey of Corwin Maddox's life. The Rolls-Royce, usually a cocoon of insulated silence and power, felt like a mobile prison cell. Each mile that separated the gleaming, sterile canyons of Manhattan from the lived-in, layered streets of Queens felt like a journey backward in time, a forced march toward a past he had systematically erased. The man who could cross continents for a deal felt a primal fear in crossing a bridge into a borough he hadn't set foot in for nearly 30 years. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a bespoke suit and tie. He'd changed into a simple dark cashmere sweater and grey slacks, a futile attempt to shed the skin of the monster he had been at the restaurant. But the clothes felt like a costume. Beneath them, he was still the same man, now irrevocably stained by the knowledge Peterson's report had unearthed. The date October 12, 1999, was burned into his mind, a brand of his own negligence. 9 months. The number echoed in the silent car, a final damning piece of evidence in the case against him. The Phantom glided to a stop before 1812 Edgewater Avenue. It was a tired, pre-war brick building, its facade showing the honest wear of countless seasons and lives. A child's bicycle was chained to the railing, and the faint sound of a television drifted from an open window. This was a world of scraped knees of grocery bills, of everyday struggles and joys he couldn't begin to comprehend. The sheer unadorned reality of it was more intimidating than any boardroom. "Wait here, Paul," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know how long I'll be." He stepped out of the car, and for a moment he felt like an alien creature descending upon a foreign planet. He was a man who moved through secured lobbies and private elevators, and the simple act of walking into a public entryway felt unnerving. The air in the lobby was thick with the smells of old linoleum, damp wool, and the faint, lingering aroma of someone's dinner. After a rattling, hesitant ride in a small, creaking elevator, he found himself standing before the faded brown paint of apartment 4B. He raised his hand to knock, but it froze in mid-air, trembling slightly. All his life he had commanded. He had summoned people, dismissed them, decided their fates with a word. Now he was the supplicant. He was the one standing outside a closed door, praying to be let in. The powerlessness was a suffocating, unfamiliar sensation. He drew a ragged breath, the air catching in his throat, and knocked. The sound was soft, tentative, a stark contrast to the authority he usually wielded. Seconds stretched into an eternity. He heard the faint sound of movement, and then the click of a lock. The door opened. It was her. Kate. She wasn't the invisible waitress in a starched uniform. She was dressed in a faded Yale sweatshirt and simple leggings, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that revealed the determined, stubborn line of her jaw. Her green eyes, the very same eyes that had haunted his sleepless night, widened in a flash of pure shock. But beneath the shock, there was no fear. There was no anger. There was just a profound, bone-deep weariness, as if his arrival was an inevitability she had long dreaded, but always expected. He saw her take in his appearance, the expensive but simple clothes, the haggard look on his face, a man utterly out of his element. She saw the Titan from the restaurant, now looking strangely diminished and lost on her worn doormat. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, steady, holding none of the fire from the night before. It was a simple question, devoid of accusation, but heavy with the weight of unspoken history. "Katherine?" "Kate." He began, his own voice sounding raspy and foreign to his ears. The name felt strange on his tongue, both an indictment and a confession. "May I come in? Please. Just for a few minutes. I won't stay long." She studied his face, her gaze sweeping over him, searching for something. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the instinct to protect herself, warring with a flicker of something else, curiosity perhaps, or a reluctant sense of duty to the ghost of her mother. For a long, agonizing moment, he was certain she would close the door in his face. He knew he deserved it. Instead, with a small, resigned sigh that seemed to release years of tension, she stepped back, holding the door open, just enough for him to enter. He stepped across the threshold and into her world. The apartment was tiny, smaller than the walk-in closet in his penthouse, but it was meticulously clean and organized. The air smelled of old books and brewing tea. Bookshelves built from simple planks and bricks overflowed with worn paperbacks, classics, and heavy textbooks on macroeconomics and political theory. It was the home of a scholar, a life of the mind cultivated in defiance of circumstance. A small desk was tucked into a corner, a laptop open next to a stack of color-coded notebooks. But his eyes were drawn to the wall beside it. Among a few smaller pictures, one frame held a larger, sun-drenched photo. It was a picture of a younger Kate, perhaps 10 or 11, with a gapped-tooth, unrestrained laugh. Her arms were wrapped tightly around the neck of a woman with kind eyes and a familiar heart-stopping smile. Eleanor. She was looking at the camera, but her entire being seemed focused on the laughing child in her arms. The love was so palpable, it was almost a physical presence in the room. A memory sharp and exquisitely painful pierced through the fog of years, Eleanor laughing just like that, after he'd told a terrible joke on a park bench near the campus, the spring sun warming their faces. "I know, Corwin," said his voice, barely a whisper. He tore his gaze from the photograph and finally turned to face his daughter. "I know who you are." Kate crossed her arms, a shield against him, against the moment. "Took you long enough?" There was no triumph in her words, just the flat, bitter statement of an old truth. The question that had been clawing at him spilled out, selfish and pathetic, even to his own ears. "Why didn't you ever try to find me? To contact me?" A short, humorless laugh escaped her lips, a sound utterly devoid of mirth. "Contact you," she repeated, her voice dripping with irony. "The great and powerful Corwin Maddox." "And say what exactly?" "Hi, my name is Kate. You might not remember my mother, Eleanor Monroe, but she said you were the love of her life before you vanished to go build an empire. By the way, based on my calculations and her stories, I think you might be my dad. Can you pencil me in for 5 minutes between hostile takeovers and firing the help?" She shook her head, her gaze dropping to the worn wooden floor. She never wanted that for me. She was proud. She raised me to be proud. She never wanted me to be some dirty little secret, begging for scraps from your table. Her eyes, now blazing with the fire he'd seen last night, flicked up to meet his. And after yesterday, I see she was absolutely right to protect me from you. The shame was a physical blow stealing his breath. "What I did," he stammered. "What I said. There is no excuse for it." None. It was cruel, vile, unforgivable. "I am so sorry, Kate." Sorry, she shot back, her voice dangerously quiet, each word a precisely aimed dart. "Sorry for what? Exactly?" "You're going to have to be more specific." Are you sorry for yelling at the clumsy waitress, or are you sorry for abandoning my mother when she was pregnant with your child? Are you sorry for letting her struggle to raise me on her own? Are you sorry she had to fight a degenerative disease buried in medical bills while you were featured in magazines for your new private jet? Which part are you sorry for, Corwin? Please clarify. He had no answer. Every word was true. He had no defense against the righteous accumulated anger of a lifetime. He stumbled back and sank onto the edge of a small, worn armchair, the springs groaning under his weight. It was the first time in his adult life he had felt truly and utterly defeated. For all of it, he finally choked out the words ripped from his throat. God, Kate. I didn't know. About her illness. About you. I swear on my life I didn't know. Would it have mattered? She challenged, her voice rising now, not in a shout, but in a wave of raw, passionate pain she had held back for years. If you had known, what would you have done? Sent a check. Would your team of expensive doctors have saved her? Or would we have just been another problem to be managed, a messy secret to be handled by that fixer of yours, Peterson? Would we have been a threat to the great Corwin Maddox brand? He flinched at the mention of Peterson's name. He had no answer because he was terrified that the man he had been just 2 days ago would have done exactly that. I didn't plan what happened at the restaurant, she continued, her anger cresting and then receding, leaving a deep, resonant sadness in its wake. I took that job because the tips are good, and my student loans are starting up again. It was a cruel, cosmic joke that I ended up at your table. I never thought I'd see you in person. And then, you were there. And you were exactly the cold, ruthless man I always feared you were. When you started yelling at me, belittling me, seeing me as nothing, everything my mother tried to protect me from, everything I had quietly carried my whole life, it broke. I just wanted you to see me. Just for 1 second. To see that a person like you had a face and a name. He looked at her, then truly looked past the anger and the pain. He saw the brilliant student from the Yale records. He saw the exhausted caregiver who had sacrificed her own future. He saw the fierce pride of Eleanor Monroe and the stubborn, unyielding ambition that was a dark mirror of his own. He saw his daughter in all her fury and grace. A hot, unfamiliar sting pricked at the back of his eyes. Your mother. He choked out the words almost impossible to say. After I left. Did she hate me? For the first time, Kate's expression softened completely. The warrior receded, leaving only the grieving daughter. She walked over to one of the overflowing bookshelves and pulled out a small, well-worn, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age. She never spoke a single bad word about you. Not once, she said, softly. She told me you were brilliant and driven, and that you had a fire inside you that was too big for a small town. She said you had to go chase a star, that some people burn too bright to stay in one place. She opened the journal, her fingers tracing the elegant, familiar handwriting on the first page. It was a quote from a John Donne poem, the very poem they had argued about in the library the day they met. Below it, Eleanor had written a dedication, her script a perfect artifact of a love he had thrown away. Kate read it aloud, her voice clear and steady in the quiet room. For Artie, my brilliant star, may you light up the world. Artie. The name, a relic from a forgotten life, was the final blow. It was the name of the boy Eleanor had loved, the boy who had dreams that went beyond balance sheets. It was the name of the person he had systematically killed to become Corwin Maddox. He covered his face with his hands as a sound tore from his chest, a raw, ugly, guttural sob, the carefully constructed dam he had built around his heart for 30 years, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The tears that fell were not just for Eleanor. They were for Kate. They were for the lost years. They were for the lonely, scared boy he had been, and for the hollow, empty man he had become. He wept with the force of a lifetime of suppressed grief, his shoulders shaking, the sounds echoing in the small, quiet apartment that was a shrine to everything he had abandoned. Kate stood and watched him. She didn't move to comfort him. She didn't offer a platitude or a gentle touch. In an act of profound, heart-breaking grace, she simply let him break. She gave him the space to drown in the truth, to feel the full, unvarnished weight of his choices for the very first time. In the stillness of her tiny home, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, the great Corwin Maddox finally truly fell. The morning after the revelation in Kate's apartment, Corwin Maddox walked through the frosted glass doors of the Maddox Capital boardroom, and the atmosphere immediately shifted. It wasn't his usual entrance, a whirlwind of authority that demanded attention. Instead, he moved with a quiet, somber gravity, his footsteps nearly silent on the plush carpet. The predatory energy that usually radiated from him, a palpable force that kept his subordinates on edge, was gone. In its place was a deep, weary introspection that his team found far more unsettling than any of his infamous tempers. Richard Holloway and Bernard Shaw were already waiting. The finalized documents for the hostile takeover of the tech firm, a multi-billion-dollar prize, were spread across the vast, polished marble table like a battle plan. It was the culmination of 6 months of ruthless strategy. Everything is ready. Corwin. Richard said, his voice slick with anticipation. He slid a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen across the table. A masterpiece of a plan, if I do say so myself. We leak the news of the CTO's resignation at 8:30. The market will hemorrhage at the 9:30 open. We submit our lowball offer at 10. By noon, we'll own them. Clean, brutal, perfect. Corwin looked down at the documents, but he didn't see the numbers or the clauses. He saw faces. He saw the terrified face of the young waiter, Leo. He saw the thousands of employees at the target company, people with mortgages and families who would be deemed redundancies and synergistic efficiencies in the restructuring that would inevitably follow. Most vividly, he saw Kate's face, strained and exhausted, buried under a mountain of debt, left by an illness that might have been manageable with the kind of resources he squandered on a single bottle of wine. The term collateral damage was no longer an abstraction. He gently pushed the pen away, its golden gleam, looking garish and cheap in the morning light. "We're not doing it," he said. His voice was calm, devoid of its usual metallic authority, yet it carried more weight than any order he had ever given. Richard's confident smirk faltered. He blinked. "What, I'm sorry, I must have misheard." "You heard me," Corwin said, meeting his gaze. "Cancel the leak. Scrap this entire proposal." "Corwin, are you unwell?" Richard sputtered, his composure cracking. "This is the deal of the decade. This is your legacy. We have them cornered, beaten. This is the kill shot." "My legacy." Corwin repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked around the opulent boardroom at the skyline of the city he had conquered and felt nothing but emptiness. "My legacy is a mess, Richard." He turned his gaze to Bernard, the older, wiser counsel who had been watching the exchange with a quiet, perceptive stillness. "Bernard, I want you to draft a new proposal. A merger, not an acquisition. We will make them a fair market value, offer a generous one. No hostile tactics. We will absorb their pension liabilities in full, and I want a clause guaranteeing no mass layoffs for a minimum of 3 years." Richard shot to his feet, his face flushed with disbelief. "A merger. A friendly merger that will cost us billions more. It will dilute our stock and obliterate our projected profit margins. It's financial suicide. We'll be a laughing stock." "I'm aware of the cost," Corwin said, his voice dropping, carrying a note of finality that silenced any further protest. "Perhaps it's time we became known for building something instead of just breaking things." "Draft the new proposal. That's an order." Richard sank back into his chair, utterly defeated. Bernard Shaw, however, looked at Corwin with a glimmer of something that resembled profound respect. He saw that the change in the man before him wasn't about a single business deal. It was a seismic shift in his very soul. Bernard simply nodded. "I'll get right on it, Corwin." Corwin's first steps on the path to redemption were clumsy, guided by the only tool he truly understood, money, operating on the flawed logic that wealth could fix anything. He had his family office discreetly pay off every cent of the staggering medical debt attached to Eleanor Monroe's name. He then established a trust for Katherine Riley, with a 7-figure deposit, an amount he considered a starting point, a down payment on his guilt. He thought of it as providing security, a foundation. The response came 2 days later. A sleek courier service delivered a crisp white envelope to his private office. Inside there was no note, no letter of explanation. There was only the certified check for the trust fund, torn neatly and precisely in half. Corwin stared at the 2 pieces of paper lying on his desk. The rejection was more powerful than any spoken rebuke. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of principle. She wasn't a problem to be solved, a liability to be paid off. The torn check was a clear, silent declaration. "You cannot buy me. You cannot buy your forgiveness." It was a rejection, not just of his money, but of his entire world-view. Humbled and lost, he realized he had to use a currency he was far less comfortable with: vulnerability. He found her number in Peterson's file, and after an hour of pacing his office, he dialed, his heart pounding like a nervous teenager's. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Katherine." It's Corwin." A weighted silence stretched across the line. "I got your delivery," he said. Finally, his voice hoarse. "It wasn't a gift." She replied, her tone cool and measured. "It was a refund on an unwanted transaction." "I know, I understand that now," he said, forcing himself to be honest. "Kate, I know I can't buy my way back into your life. That was a mistake. My mistake. But I want to earn it. If you'll let me." He could almost hear her skepticism through the phone. "What does that even mean?" "It means starting small." He pleaded, a desperation in his voice he hadn't felt in decades. "I know you had to leave Yale. I know what you were studying. You're brilliant. You shouldn't be serving coffee because of debts that were never your fault. Let me help you go back." He rushed to continue before she could refuse. "Not by paying for it. I see now that's not the way. But I still have connections at the university. I can make a call, speak to the scholarship board, and ask them to reconsider your case based on the extenuating family circumstances. You would get back in on your own merit, Kate, your own grades, your own brilliance. All I would do is open the door that was unfairly closed on you. I just want to help give you back the future you sacrificed." The line was silent for so long he thought she had hung up. Then he heard a soft, shaky breath. Why, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do that?" Corwin closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against the cool glass of his office window. "Because your mother believed you were destined for great things," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And for the first time in a very, very long time, I want to be the man she thought I was." That was the turning point. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opening. Their reconciliation began not with a hug, but with a series of stilted, awkward meetings in neutral ground coffee shops, halfway between her world and his. They navigated the minefield of their shared and unshared history, learning to speak a language that wasn't laden with anger or guilt. He learned about the small joys of her childhood, the fierce love and dignity with which Eleanor had raised her. She in turn began to see past the billionaire caricature to the driven, scared young man he had once been. One crisp Saturday in November, as the semester at Yale was in full swing for her, she called him. Her voice was hesitant. "I'm driving up to New Haven," she said, "to visit her grave. I do it every month." I thought, maybe you'd want to come. The drive was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence filled with unspoken understanding. They stood together in the quiet cemetery, under a grey sky that threatened snow. The headstone was simple, elegant, and heart-breaking. Eleanor Munro, beloved mother. She lit up the world. Corwin felt the full, crushing weight of his 26-year absence. He placed a single, long-stemmed white rose on the cold stone, remembering how he used to buy them for her from a street vendor outside the Sterling Memorial Library. He didn't speak, couldn't speak. He just stood beside his daughter, united in a grief that was both decades old and devastatingly new. As they walked slowly back towards the car, the crunching of fallen leaves, the only sound between them, Kate finally spoke, her breath misting in the cold air. "She would have been happy, you know," she said softly, looking at him, her green eyes clear and direct. "To see you here, to see us, trying." Corwin Maddox looked at his daughter, this brilliant, resilient woman who was the living legacy of his one true love, and felt a profound warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't the fleeting thrill of an acquisition or the hollow satisfaction of power. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more real. It was hope. The empire of steel and glass he had built meant nothing compared to the fragile foundation they were laying right here, brick by painful brick. The cost of redemption was higher than any fortune. But for the first time in his life, Corwin Maddox was making an investment he knew was priceless. Corwin Maddox's story isn't about a billionaire becoming a better person overnight. It's a raw and honest look at the choices we make and the ghosts they create. It shows us that our past is never truly gone, and our legacy isn't defined by the money we make, but by the lives we touch and the lives we break. The confrontation in that restaurant wasn't an ending. It was a violent, necessary beginning. It's a reminder that redemption isn't a single act, but a long, difficult road paved with humility and effort. True wealth isn't found in a bank vault, but in the courage to face our mistakes and the grace to rebuild what we once destroyed. If this story moved you, please give this video a like. It helps us share more powerful stories like this one. Share it with someone you think needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that makes you think, feel, and see the world a little differently. What did you think of Corwin's choice in the end? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching.